The historical figure you're referring to is likely Hugh Despenser the Younger, a powerful and controversial favourite of King Edward II of England. His dramatic fall from power, including his castration and public execution in 1326, is one of the most infamous events in medieval English history. Who was Hugh Despenser the Younger? Born circa 1286, died November 24th, 1326. Titles: First Lord Despenser, Royal Chamberlain family, son of Hugh Despenser the Elder, another powerful royal ally. Despenser rose to prominence in the 1310s and became the favourite and possibly the lover of King Edward II. After the fall of Edward's previous favourite, Piers Gaveston, Despenser became the king's most trusted advisor and wielded enormous influence at court. Why was he hated? 1. Greed and corruption. Despenser used his position to amass vast estates and wealth, often illegally seizing lands. Tyranny. He ruthlessly suppressed opposition, particularly among the English barons and marcher lords in Wales. Abuse of power. He manipulated justice, bullied rivals, and alienated both the nobility and Queen Isabella, Edward II's wife. Downfall and death. Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer. In 1326, Isabella, estranged from Edward, invaded England with her lover, Roger Mortimer. They gathered support from discontented nobles. Capture of the Despensers. Both Hugh Despenser the Elder and Younger were captured. The elder was executed first, hanged and beheaded. Despenser the Younger's execution, November 24th, 1326, at Hereford. His execution was meant to be a public spectacle and deterrent. He was tried for treason, robbery, and unnatural crimes, including accusations of sodomy, likely politically motivated. Dragged through the streets on a hurdle, hanged but cut down before death, castrated and his genitals burned before his eyes, disemboweled, his intestines burned. Finally, beheaded and his body quartered. His head was displayed in London. The quarters were sent to various cities. Despenser's brutal execution marked the end of Edward II's reign. The king was deposed shortly after and allegedly murdered in captivity in 1327. Despenser remains one of the most vivid examples of how absolute power and royal favoritism could lead to both rapid ascent and horrific downfall in medieval politics. The Fall of Hugh Despenser the Younger, written in a historical storytelling tone, picking up just before his final days. The final days of Hugh Despenser the Younger, as the forces of Queen Isabella swept through England in the autumn of 1326, the Despensers, father and son, knew their days were numbered. With King Edward II clinging to a crumbling throne, they fled westward, hoping to find sanctuary in Wales. But the nobility had turned. Even the common folk, embittered by years of Despenser tyranny, clamoured for vengeance. On November 16th, they were captured near Treason. King Edward and Hugh Despenser were discovered disguised and half-starved, their power reduced to ash. While Edward was led into custody, Despenser was dragged to Hereford, the epicenter of his reckoning. Trial and condemnation, there was no pretense of justice. He was accused not only of tyranny and treason, but of violating the very order of nature. Sodomy with the king, the indictment claimed. In truth, these charges were meant to humiliate and erase him, as his enemies sought to destroy not only his body, but his memory. The sentence was already written. The ordeal at Hereford. November 24th, 1326. Despenser was paraded through the city on a hide-covered hurdle, a symbol of his disgrace. The crowd jeered and pelted him with filth. Once a man who had lorded over barons and kings, now he was chained like a wild beast. At the scaffold, the executioner began his grim task. First, Despenser was hanged, but cut down while still conscious. Then, in a punishment reserved for traitors and those accused of unnatural crimes, he was castrated. His genitals thrown into a fire. He was disemboweled, watching as his entrails were removed and burned before him. Finally, his heart was torn out, and his body beheaded and quartered. His head was sent to London Bridge, a warning to all who might rise by royal favor. His limbs were scattered to York, Bristol, and other cities. The fall of a King Edward II, broken and abandoned, was deposed weeks later. His fate mirrored that of his favorite: imprisonment, humiliation, and likely murder in Berkeley Castle in 1327. The Despensers became a cautionary tale. Their name, once feared, was reduced to whispers and curses. History has debated the extent of Hugh Despenser's crimes. Was he a tyrant, or merely a man who climbed too high on the unstable ladder of royal favor? What is clear is this: in the brutal politics of medieval England, no man was safe when the tide turned, not even the king's shadow. The power vacuum left by Despenser's death, the fate of Edward II, and the rise of Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer, a period rich in intrigue, betrayal, and shifting power. The Widow and the Wolf, with Hugh Despenser's mutilated body cooling under the winter. Skye, Queen Isabella stood at the pinnacle of her power. No longer the spurned queen in the shadow of her husband's favorites, she now commanded the loyalty of England's barons and the fear of its enemies. Beside her stood Roger Mortimer, her lover and co-conspirator, a marcher lord with ambition, as sharp as his sword. Together they would become the true rulers of England, even as Edward II still drew breath. The king in captivity, Edward II, once sovereign of the realm, was now a prisoner. He was moved from castle to castle, Kenilworth, then Berkeley, as the nobility debated his fate. Stripped of royal dignity, he was forced to abdicate in favor of his 14-year-old son, Edward III, in January 1327. But even in chains, Edward II posed a threat. His continued existence was a beacon for royalist plots. So, in the shadows of Berkeley Castle, a grim decision was made. The mysterious death of Edward II own, the night of September 21, 1327, Edward died under suspicious circumstances. The official story claimed he died of illness, but chroniclers whispered darker tales, that a red-hot poker was driven into his bowels, a death designed to leave no mark. While some historians debate the truth of this tale, the symbolism was clear. Edward had been destroyed just as Despenser had been, violently, intimately, and utterly. Isabella and Mortimer, tyrants in turn at first, England rejoiced. Isabella was called the she-wolf of France, but many saw her as a liberator. Mortimer was named Earl of March and governed with royal authority, though young Edward III was king in name. But power changes even liberators. They amassed wealth and titles. Mortimer executed rivals and ruled as though he were king. They refused to step down, even as Edward III came of age. In the court, whispers turned to plots. The wheel of fortune, ever turning, would not rest. Retribution. 1330, at the age of 17, Edward III struck. With a band of loyal knights, he stormed Nottingham Castle by a secret tunnel and arrested Mortimer. Before a stunned court, Edward accused him of treason, tyranny, and the murder of his father. Mortimer was hanged at Tyburn without the brutal mutilations he himself had ordered for Despenser. But the message was the same. The reign of terror was over. Queen Isabella was spared, confined to a life of comfortable exile in Castle Rising. She would live until 1358, cloaked in wealth but haunted by her past. Echoes in history. The tale of Hugh Despenser, Edward II, Isabella, and Mortimer is a brutal reminder of medieval politics. There were no favorites without enemies, no kings without risks, and no triumphs without blood. What began as a royal infatuation ended with public castration, regicide, and a queen who tasted vengeance, only to be swallowed by it.